So, Fadi, let's start with just outlining for us what this academic study shows, because and we should say that Facebook in particular, but also in Google, in the news this week, they have been the Australian government has basically said they have to pay for news content. Then there's a flip side of that, which is the arguably news content or not news content that portrays itself as news. But talk about this research conducted by Ethan Porter of George Washington University.
Yes, so the first piece of research, and there are two pieces of research here. One is about the coronavirus-related misinformation that's been spreading. What the research finds, it looks at 100 samples of misinformation. Of course, there are thousands of samples out there, and our organization monitors, thousands of pieces of content. But we decided to just take one sample and look to see how many people it had reached. And what the studies there found is that only 100 posts of misinformation. These are harmful things that can make people sick, like taking chlorine dioxide will heal you from the coronavirus, or drinking water and garlic will make you immune to the disease. And those types of posts, just 100 posts, were shared 1.7 million times and viewed 117 million times. And that's the tip of the iceberg. So the first thing here is that this misinformation is going viral on the platform, and Facebook is its epicenter. The other big thing that this study showed was that Facebook's current moderation policy, so Facebook gets excited about speaking about how they're putting fact checks up when they detect misinformation, or how they're taking down harmful coronavirus content. And what our study shows is that these efforts by Facebook are extremely delayed. So millions of people, we found that in our sample, which are all fact-checked pieces of misinformation, 4 out of 10 were not labeled. They were not fact-checked, and they were not removed. So 40% of already fact-checked content is staying on the platform. And we found for the remaining 60%, most of it is delayed when they fact-check it, or delayed before they remove it. It could take a week, sometimes up to 3 weeks. So
wait, let me just reiterate that. So 40% of the stuff that they fact checked is never removed, and 60% is removed, but it's removed after a week or so, which, based upon the speed in which this information travels, it means it's hit a ton of people already.
Exactly. And you can imagine, Sam, that in the midst of this pandemic, where people are sitting at home, looking for facts, trying to figure out what to do, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear. They're on their phones being flooded with these lies that, if you believe them, even if just 10% of people believe these lies, they could make you do something that is not only harmful to yourself, but that is also harmful to your family and your community. And that's why we wanted to do this study, to show that, Facebook is promising to take a lot of steps to fight this type of content. So are other platforms, but the steps they're currently taking are not enough. And at the heels of this report, Facebook decided to take an important step, which is to start alerting people when they see that they had seen harmful misinformation content about COVID-19. The problem is Facebook's alerts, at least on how they're currently designed, are not enough to truly inform people. And that's the other study you mentioned by Ethan Porter and Tom Wood that we commissioned. That study shows that if you present people with sophisticated corrections, sophisticated fact checks, then you can decrease the number of people who believe disinformation by up to 50% and sometimes more. But Facebook is not implementing that solution, just implementing, a small part of it.
Okay. So, let's take these two things separately. And we should just say that, and and I don't know, I imagine there is research out there about first impressions, right? I mean, how, and this obviously is implicated in the second study, which talks about like how, what's involved in shaking people's belief of fake news. But I can tell you that just there was a separate study done this week at the University of Chicago. It's a working paper, fair enough, but they compared the viewership of Sean Hannity relative to Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson took coronavirus seriously. Sean Hannity said it was a hoax up until, I don't know, very close to the shutdowns for everybody, maybe even through that on some level. And there are now clusters of death that correlate to where Hannity outperforms Tucker Carlson. Again, working paper, but it's more indication of the implications of getting false news, that you take it seriously and you don't go back and necessarily check on it on some level, unless there's some type of intervention. So when you did this second study that to determine if you can reverse it, because and at the end of this, I want to really have a more, have a frank conversation about what Facebook's game is here, because this is not a story, it seems to me, of incompetence, but it's important to establish that you can mitigate the impact of this on some level. So let's talk about that mitigation. There are multiple examples of basically providing corrections that you guys did in this study that show you, like you say, you can cut the understanding of the misinformation in half. Still rather dangerous, but it's something anyways. What was involved in that process though? Was it sitting people down and forcing them to read this? Like, can you do it without having control of a certain group of people, like force their eyeballs on this stuff?
That's a great question, and that's why the way we designed our study was to mimic as closely as possible the Facebook experience. So we designed a website that we called factbook.org, and anyone can visit it. And the professors that we worked with, we hired YouGov research unit, and what they did is they chose 2,000, random Americans.
Fatty, I can't, Fatty, excuse me, I'm sorry, I can't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just try and hold your mouthpiece still for a moment? We're just losing you a little bit.
Oh, sorry about that. Is this better?
Yeah, that's much better.
All right. So where did you guys lose me? I can start from there.
I mean, if you can just start after that question of like, how do you get their eyes trained on what you want them to see?
Yeah. So the way we designed the study was to mimic as closely as possible the user's experience on Facebook. So we designed a website called factbook.org that looks pretty much just like Facebook. And 2,000 Americans through YouGov is like academic research unit. 2,000 Americans were randomly chosen. And what we asked them to do is we gave them a news feed that looks exactly like the Facebook news feed, and we had them go through that news feed. Now, for some of the people in the study, they just saw normal Facebook posts, pictures of people's dogs, stuff like that. For another part of the group, they saw a normal Facebook news feed, but it had misinformation stories, misinformation posts there. And they were real misinformation posts, not ones that we created. They were ones we actually found online. For example, one claiming that the measles outbreak in the U.S. was due to the illegal immigration. And then a group of people not only saw after the people went through this news feed, people were then later asked to go through another news feed that looks like Facebook. And this news feed had a list of corrections in it. So it would say, alert, it seems like you've previously seen misleading information. And then they'd have a post that shows them, it would say, On day X, you saw a post claiming that the measles outbreak was due to Y. This post has been proven false by the AP fact checkers and factchecks.org. This post was actually put out by this person. It explained, not only told people that this post was false, it gave them the correction. So also said the measles outbreak in the U.S. is due to, certain population clusters not taking vaccinations. So what we found is then for those 2,000 people, we simply asked them a true or false question. And what we found is that people who saw the corrections, 50% less of them believed the misinformation. So the reason the study that was put out is so important is that it actually looks just like Facebook. So we can make the claim that if these corrections were put on Facebook, the results would largely be similar. They could even be better at Facebook because Facebook has a better design team. And that's why we feel confident in saying that this solution works on social media and particularly on the Facebook newsfeed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does. So let me ask you this. I mean, with essentially, and you're basically mocking the experience of Facebook and trying to sort of recreate that experience and how it would work if Facebook actually provided these corrections. But let me ask you this: like, with all that said, were you shocked that it was only 50%? I mean, it cuts both ways. Like on one hand, like, oh, okay, 50%, that's good. That's a good thing. But on the other hand, it's like, what's it going to take? I mean, the authority that they responded to was theoretically identical to the authority that basically said to them, hey, you rely on us for information. What you saw was fake, but they were still like, I'm going to choose to believe the fake thing more. Sorry.
Well, it actually, the results were not exactly like that. So, number one, a good amount of people, between 25 to 30%, answered, I don't know. And when we went back to those who answered, I don't know, or those who even answered, the wrong answer, they still believe the false news. The main reason they gave us about a majority of the people who gave the wrong answer or didn't know the right answer, even after seeing the correction, what they told us is this. They said, yeah, we saw the correction, but we have never heard of Facebook doing these types of fact checks. So we didn't know whether to trust it or not because it just looked so new to us. So our estimation based on our continued testing is that if Facebook actually announces to people and says, we're going to be working with independent fact checkers to send you a fact check. So if you see this on your newsfeed, you can trust it. The results would be much better. Probably an internal kind of test we've done later out of us with our numbers, we got up to 80 to 82% of people believing the correction. So we can definitely improve and decrease the level of uncertainty. The other important bit here that I think is key is that, because people always say, oh, you're always going to have a group who believe the misinformation or who believe the lies. And that's true. You're always going to have a, ideological or dogmatic group within any society who are always going to believe that,
Right.
vaccinations cause autism. But those people will continue to be a minority. Their goal, the reason they use social media, is to spread their kind of misinformation, their lies, like a virus. And the goal of this is to really, the people who are in between, the people who don't know enough about the topic, the goal is to quarantine them against that misinformation. And one interesting thing that this study found is there was a subset of the study group that neither saw the misinformation, the lies, nor did they see, the correction. They were just people who saw a normal Facebook newsfeed. And the people who saw the misinformation plus the correction actually performed better in knowing what's true from false than the people who saw neither the misinformation nor the correction, which is another indication that having these corrections is more kind of useful and more effective. So again, these studies, this research needs to go on, but you can really kind of, if designed well, you can really benefit society
And I guess that last point you're making is that on some level, as you expose people more to this, they become savvier readers of information in some way. That it becomes a there's a certain, I guess, feedback loop in terms of developing the muscles once you see examples of this. All right, so with that said, with if we stipulate that there's been research that shows that misinformation can be corrected, can be combated, that you can't maybe eliminate 100% of its implications, but you can eliminate a significant portion of its implications. Is this ultimately just about putting pressure on Facebook because by basically taking off the table one of their excuses? Because I'm beginning to become of the mind that there's a reason why this stuff is so prominent on Facebook, and that is because they have a financial incentive to have this on Facebook. That conflict, that stories that are shocking, that all of this stuff, even controversial because it's fake, actually creates profits for them. And that if they really wanted to have, get rid of it, they could hire human beings instead of relying on algorithms, but that would be too costly and they don't want to start that precedent. And if they had human beings, then they might have less of an excuse as to why they don't want to take this stuff down. I mean, is that really, at the end of the day, like, do we really anticipate that Facebook is going to change their business model? Or is this is a way to inspire lawmakers to say, hey, Facebook has a business model that is never going to disavow them of this practice of essentially allowing fake news to flourish?
That's a great question, and the answer to it is a bit nuanced based on our experience, and it differs from social media platform to social media platform. I think Facebook particularly does have a problem, which is that they need to what we call detox the algorithm, which is redesign their algorithm so they're more focused on, healthy social engagement instead of giving incentive to outrageous content. The algorithms kind of learn through machine learning and other artificial intelligence. Facebook tells the algorithm to largely learn how do you keep people online the longest and engaged the longest so that they see the most ads. And YouTube and Twitter and others do the same thing. What the platforms need to do is to redesign, to detoxify their algorithms, to make them better for society. And there's a big debate about how to do that. And a lot of people argue that the only way to do that is through regulation, because you have a type of new form of what some call surveillance capitalism that can't be fixed without strong regulation. On the other hand, based on our experience with Facebook, there are teams at Facebook, their integrity team, they have a misinformation team that really work hard and are testing some of the solutions that you and I are talking about. And those people are great people that are committed to solving this problem. Why doesn't Facebook move faster? One reason may be that it's not about the financial aspect, because that's something that it won't really harm them if they really begin implementing corrections the way we're talking about. It could actually benefit them because it increases trust in the platform, is what we're finding. But the main reason is that you have politicians around the world, Bolsonaro, Moody, a number of politicians, both local and at national level here in the U.S., who benefit from misinformation campaigns, who benefit from political disinformation. And Facebook at the executive level, not at the level of people trying to solve these problems, but at the executive level, appears to be kind of unwilling or have made the calculation that if we really go strong on these solutions, it could cause us a lot of trouble with some of these misinformation actors. So it's better not to move at the scale necessary to solve this issue because we don't want to rock the boat. And it seems to be like YouTube and to a large extent Twitter and have taken a similar decision of not really challenging this misinformation and disinformation phenomena, which you're right is premeditated in many cases. It's not just a random person wanting to spread rumors. It's people who designed these lives to have political and social impact, and the platforms do not want to go head and head towards them. And this is where we think the kind of both research and advocacy and social pressure and media pressure is important to get the platforms to act.
Well, I agree with that, and I also have to confess that I am cynical enough to be a little skeptical about the Facebook executives who are afraid of providing fact checking in this country because they're afraid of Bolsonaro, or they're afraid of some other I don't know, Orban or whoever they want to say is the one that's really holding them back. At the end of the day, one way or another, this has to be fixed. And if it, in this research at the very least, provides a one element in pushing back on Facebook's exclamations that, we're doing everything we can do about it. Well, they're not. Fadi, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And if I can add,
please,
just a couple of points. Maybe I'm too optimistic on this front, but when we began working on this 2 years ago, Facebook told us that providing fact-check correction on any content was impossible, and it was too big of an ask, and it was something they wouldn't do. Last year in October, they unveiled labeling, putting warning labels on misinformation content due to pressure and due to societal pressure, and also due to threats of regulation coming from the EU and other countries. And then, Facebook told us, okay, this is as far as we'll go, but we'll never send everybody a correction to all misinformation they're seeing because retroactive corrections are impossible to do and they're a headache and we can't technically do them. And then this research came out forward in the midst of this pandemic, and they created a precedent where they had to retroactively inform people. So I do think you're right. Facebook won't, and none of the platforms will move unless they're pushed and put in a corner to act. But I don't think that it's impossible to get them to act. And the other point is on the 50%, we're always pushing for more, and we think we can achieve more. But 50% of people believing or not believing disinformation can shift an election, and it can shift a swing state. And that's why, even if it's just 50%, even if it's 30%, Facebook needs to implement this before the US 2020 election, because otherwise Russia and other disinformation actors can come in, use disinformation, and switch, influence people to switch their votes. And Facebook can protect people against that, and its responsibility is to do so.
Fadi Quran, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam, and I hope you guys have a great day.